All right, podcasters, you guys are probably here because you want information on where and how to submit your podcasts. And I'm going to go through not only a list of each of the places to submit your podcast, but why you would want to go to each one and why they're important. Now, don't skimp on the details here. Make sure you stay for the whole thing because you're going to want to know how this works. So I am your podcast professor. My name is Tom, or Robots. I run the Robots Radio Network. And if this podcast is helpful in any way, make sure you subscribe to the channel below. Come on back later for some more information that you will find very useful. And I've also got a whole bunch of other videos on this channel, so go check them out. All right, let's get into the details. So first of all, everybody knows that you need to be on Apple Podcasts. They're still the big one. They're still the big 800-pound gorilla. It's a pain in the butt sometimes. And sometimes the submitting of the podcast doesn't work the first time, so you're just going to have to do it a few times in some cases. The site that you need to go to for that is itunesconnect.apple.com, and you are going to log in or create an iTunes account to do so. You can go through all the different prompts and submit your RSS feed there. It shouldn't be too difficult. iTunes is important because of not only the vast number of people who listen on the Apple Podcast app for podcasts, but because it's still a source for finding new shows, and they rank the shows, and there's also a search engine in that app. So you have to make sure that you're on there, or you're going to miss maybe a good third of your audience. Also, if you are on this platform, make sure you are letting your listeners know to leave a rating and review for your show, because Apple will recommend shows based on the total number of downloads that they get and the quality or amount of the ratings and the fact that they're continuing to still get ratings. Their search part of their platform isn't great, and you're going to have to deal with shows that may not even exist anymore because they had such a large number of downloads already. So you have to make sure that you're at least playing the game a little bit and asking your listeners to leave you a 5-star rating and review the show. One tip for doing that is to read out those at the end of a podcast. So that's a way that you can thank people for doing that. All right, let's move on to the second one. Spotify, the new up-and-comer in the scene. Spotify is doing an amazing job taking over podcasting platforms like Anchor, and also offering up podcasts on their platform for people listening to music to go check out something else for free. Another third of your audience will potentially be on Spotify. So you're going to want to go to Spotify for podcasts, podcasters.spotify.com. And this system is so much easier to use than the one that you're going to have to use for Apple Podcasts. You're going to log in, you're going to have a place where you can submit your RSS feed, and you will know right then if you are accepted for the platform. On Apple Podcasts, they can take a week to get back to you, and it's a pain in the butt. Have I mentioned that's a pain in the butt? So make sure you go to Spotify. It is the place where a lot of people are going for podcasts now. Next on the list, you can't forget Google, right? You want your podcast to show up in Google Music. You want your podcast to show up as a search result. Google needs to be aware of your podcast. And so you're going to go to podcastmanager.google.com. Again, you're going to connect this to one of your Google accounts, submit the RSS feed, and make sure that you get on Google. A lot of people aren't listening to podcasts on the Google Music app or whatever they use. They're usually using other devices if they're on Android to listen, or other apps to listen. But it's still a good place to make sure that you go in order to get your podcast out there. Next on the list, Amazon. Amazon for a reason, not because they're going to be buying your podcast on Amazon.com, but because they could be listening on Alexa. Okay, she didn't hear me. So you want to make sure you go to Amazon.com/music/IP/podcasts and submit your podcast there. Follow the prompts, get the podcast submitted. It's not difficult to do. I have had a number of people say, hey, I was just asking Alexa if there was a podcast about this thing, and she recommended your show. So it's another good source for search and for getting your podcast out there. Next on the list, for a similar reason, Pandora. So you're going to go to ampplaybook.com/podcasts. to submit your show to Pandora. Same kind of thing. If people are listening on their smart devices, they might be using the Pandora app. And if they're using the Pandora app to listen to music, they might be asking it to play some podcasts for them too. So it's another good place to make sure you're at. Smart devices are becoming more and more ubiquitous, and you want to make sure that you show up if somebody asks for a podcast that happens to do the thing that your show's about. So make sure you don't miss out on that. Last and maybe not least still is Stitcher. Stitcher is one of the most popular apps out there. You can go to partners.stitcher.com/join to make sure your podcast is on there. Sometimes they'll pull the feeds from the other platforms like Apple, and they'll just go ahead and use them. But make sure that you set up an account. You can see your stats. You can see your details on there. And Stitcher does have some sub-audience, some niche audiences that prefer them to some of these other podcatcher devices or apps. So make sure you get it on there. The last thing I would recommend is YouTube. But YouTube's tricky. I'm going to have to put out another video specifically about what you should do to maximize podcasts on YouTube. I wouldn't recommend right now just taking the audio with like a waveform. I've done it. It can be okay, but it doesn't work the way that you would really want it to. And I don't think it's going to drive a lot of people to go from YouTube to another platform to search for your podcast the way that you would hope. And it's probably going to take more time than it's worth right now. The short answer is, if you are doing a video component to your podcast, like talking heads while you're recording, that can work well on YouTube, but you also have to augment that with some other things in order to use the YouTube search to draw people into that show. Otherwise, you're just going to be pulling some of the audience that would be listening on audio to YouTube instead of the other way around. And really, it should be working the other way around for you to maximize things. And you would get, even if your YouTube channel is monetized, you'll make less money. So for right now, don't worry about YouTube unless you have a really sophisticated plan for chopping up your content and putting other content on that channel that brings people to that channel for similar concepts so that they then find the podcast. I'll get into more details in a future video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and like the video and come back for more stuff. I'm hoping to grow this channel. It's still a small channel, so anything you guys can do to help me out with that, if you appreciate the content, would be very, very much appreciated. Thank you so much for listening. I'll talk to you guys again later.